All right, I'm thrilled to be with my friend Darryl Miller, and he and I have struck up a friendship online, and we've had the opportunity to converse a few times. And I'm thrilled to have you today, Darryl. And I just wanted to take a moment and have you introduce yourself to folks and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm honored to be here with you, Scott. I had the pleasure of seeing some of your content online, and I was very impressed with your testimony. And your testimony was sort of like, I guess, the friend that you shared that you went to youth camp with. I was that friend to somebody else. So,
Okay.
and growing up in the United States, that's probably most of our experiences being Black in the United States. I grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, uh, born and raised. Ended up going to college there and gave my life to Christ through the ministry called FCA. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And my life was radically changed. God used a man named Gary Beats, a young, short Italian male who had a passion for Christ, came down and showed me what love is all about, and took me into his house, showed me around. I never had somebody of that persuasion to show me attention. So I was curious of why he's interested in my well being. So he had a big influence on my life. So once I went to college in North Carolina, I ended up getting involved with church, and I just hit the ground running. I was very enthusiastic. I was in evangelism, street outreach. Got involved with the Assemblies of Gods in that
Okay.
area because I was looking for a church that was really teaching how to walk the walk. And I don't know, coming from Jackson, Mississippi, moving to Hickory, North Carolina, it was like, in my words, I called home and said, "Mom, I'm in Mayberry." I mean, it's not anybody around. In fact, I remember asking people on campus, "Where do you keep all the Black people?" I mean, other than the police on campus, it was just me and I would say 25 others at that
Well,
time. And that's more now, but at that time it wasn't.
yeah, when you talk about your experiences, and I think a lot of Black people have had a similar experience, perhaps at some point in their life, being in a predominantly white institution, whether it's a church or whether it's a school. What were some of the challenges that you faced during those times?
Well, at that time, I was very, very hungry to learn more about God, and I was more interested in changing myself than looking at the I guess the obvious the elephant in the room per
Yeah,
se. Of course, you had people who look at me and all they saw was the athlete, Black athlete, but then you have some who overlooked it and saw a person who wanted to learn more about God. And unfortunately, I had those people around me, but it didn't keep me from running to places where people showed me who I were when I went in. I mean, as a male coming up in Jackson, I knew who was my enemy. But
yeah.
when I got up here, you really didn't know who your enemy here because some people would smile at you, but when in behind the doors, they said other things. So
So facing those challenges and having people speak to you about your relationship with God, did you find that your relationship with God grew quite a bit during that time?
yeah, it did. I realized that sometimes I had to overlook people's shortcomings. I had to realize that they're seeing things as they seeing things through the flesh, where I would try to see things on the spiritual. And God looks on the inside of man, on the outside of man.
Right.
So that's all they were bounded to the outside of man. So I tried not to. I was a person who struggled with anger growing up because of some of the things I grew up in my family. But that's one of the things God delivered me of. So that's one of the things I had to do. Don't rely on your flesh there. Don't react to somebody else's ignorance. So
And there's a lot of it out there, right? A lot of ignorance out
yes,
there.
sir. Yes, sir. And I think a lot of people says things that I don't think they knew what they were. Those small little micro things they would say. There's like You're very smart for a black person.
Yeah,
Oh, wow, you're not like all other. I was like, what are you saying? No,
exactly.
I'm
Yeah,
standing inside. Like, what are you saying?
right. Yeah, and you hear a lot of those kinds of things, and you're right. White folks, especially, they have no idea of what they're saying, and they're just repeating things that they've heard all their lives, and they don't realize how hurtful it can be.
As a college student, I really I struggled with that in class. And I thought that'd be okay, but inside the church, you thought you were safe.
Yeah,
You know, in class, I remember my professor passing out the test grades, and he wanted to graduate. I want to give special congratulation to the two people who scored the highest on the exam. Is one lady and myself. And when I got my paper, the professor said, "I also want to wish you good luck on your last game of your season." And when the lady, the other girl who had high school turned around and said, "You play football?" Well, I said, "Yeah." Oh, what? Because I can score good on tests, you mean I can't play football? I mean,
yeah,
it was
exactly.
little stuff like that. But to get that in church, it's so like it had a sharper. It felt like a knife digging in sharper because they're like, you should know born better than that. You
Yeah,
should be beyond that.
yeah. You would think that a lot of times in church circles, or at least we would hope, right, that that an experience with Jesus would change people's disposition towards one another. But a lot of times, you still experience the same amount of racism and prejudice within the church, if not more.
One of my closest mentors used to tell me, once you cross the bloodline, during the blood of Christ, there should be no color line. The bloodline should erase all color lines,
Yeah,
and that's what I stood on. But coming up in the area that like this, one of the biggest moments, and I'll share this with you. I had a friend who was very close to me. His name's Scott Sutherland. He's a minister now in somewhere Minnesota. I think it was Minnesota. He offered me to come up to work with him when he got his job, but I knew God's called me to stay here in North Carolina. But Scott and I was close. He went to North Carolina State. He came out of college, came back to Hickory where he was from, and we went to church together. We went through our young singles ministry. We started it in the church, and it was a flourishing group. And we're having an event one night, and everybody's sitting around talking about finding the right person in Christ. Is one of the Bible stuff we're doing. Find that person to be the right person in Christ, not using the world's methods to find a date. After doing the Bible study, everybody kept talking about who they thought they were going to date and how they're going to find a date. And one of the young ladies, now mind you, I'm the only black person in that group right now. So we were talking, and one of the young ladies said, "Well, Darryl, what are you going to do?" And I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, there's no other black person in this group." And Scott looked at me because he saw my face when she said that. I said, "Well, whoever God has for me, it'll be whoever He want me to be with,
yeah,
no matter who she is or where she is." And Scott saw how that hit me. And after that meeting, me and him had a talk. He said, "There, I knew that there was racism and all that, but I didn't see that until I saw her say that to you." And he started crying. And I said, "Why are you crying?" Because he said, "I never saw it
yeah,
until that day." It took him seeing how they treated me as I was not like them.
yeah.
I was the other.
Right. And unfortunately, for a lot of us white folks, until we see a blatant example of that right in front of us, it doesn't occur to us because the world that we're living in was made by people that look like us, for people that look like us. And I wish that was something that more white people could understand, is that when we talk about ideas of status and privilege, we're not necessarily talking about not being poor. Most of us that have grown up in the United States, we have struggled. We have economic challenges and things of that nature. But for Black people growing up in the United States, there is the added layer of discrimination, of prejudice, of racism that we as white folks, we don't have to deal with. And that's what we mean when we use terms like white privilege, not necessarily that you're rich and that you didn't have to struggle, but you don't have to face the racism on a daily basis that Black folks have to live with in this country.
And you're right. And I feel that a lot of people, and the reason why we can't get to the root of the problem is a lot of people feel like if we don't talk about it, it'll go away.
Yeah.
And that's never been a solution. If I go to the doctor today and I put my illness, the first thing he's going to ask me, okay, let's talk about your family history.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to go back in my family history to see what my family uh, uh, tendencies are. Or
Right.
if I went to a psychiatrist today and told him I was suffering with depression, he's going to go back into my history and say, okay, what happened to you when you was a child? They go back to my history and find out what happened to hurt you that put you on this track.
Yeah.
And see, what we don't do as the church, we don't say, okay, let's go back in the history and see where did we go wrong? Where did this happen? How can we reconcile when we don't know where we jumped off the track? And
Exactly.
as long as we keep turning our eyes to that, we're not going to see that.
What is it that you wish more people understood, either in the church or even in the larger society, about these particular issues? And you're exactly right. We don't talk about these things enough because, quite frankly, I think a lot of people are afraid to talk about them, because they're afraid that maybe they'll say the wrong thing. But what we don't acknowledge, we cannot change. And so we've got to get past that. So, from your estimation, with your experience, what are some things that we avoid talking about that we should be talking about?
I think we look at the elephant from two different sides, two different point of views. And what I'm seeing in the one side of it, and I know this is the side of it, and I know what I see is true. The person on the other side see another side, and he's seeing that that's true.
Mhm.
Um, one of my classmates, and this happened, and I was now, and I laughed after it happened. I said, this was of God," because I knew I was talking to you today. I posted a video on my Facebook of a woman who said the same thing I just said about her going to the doctor and she was suffering from depression, and what the doctor told her that she had to face a past, and she was confronting the school board about what they was doing and wiping out history, Black history in their school board, and saying we don't go back and confront our past and show our kids how to not to repeat our past, and we're doing their future. But this guy saw that post and he responded back to me. That's a friend of mine. I graduated from. He's white, grew up in Jackson. Um, my school in Jackson was probably one of the few schools that had white people there. Majority of schools in Jackson were majority Black. There were three schools that had like probably 10%, 50% white. So he called me. He posted back. My poster said, "Darryl, do you think there's still racial, what how you phrase it? Do you think there's still systemic racism?" I said, "What?" Yes, there's systemic racism.
Yeah.
What? Then he started, then he sent me some posts from Morgan Freeman about not talking about it and then go away and all that stuff. And I said, I don't talk about this online. If you want to talk about it, call me.
Yeah.
So he picked up the phone. We talked and we talked, and it went straight to politics. I said, wait a minute, I don't want to talk politics.
Yeah.
Me and you can talk about this situation, but I'm not going to talk politics.
Right.
And after we started talking, I let him talk, and I told him what. I said, I'm not going to tell you my opinion. I'm going to tell you facts, stuff I experienced as a person, and I'm going to show you what systemic racism is. And what he kept saying, well, I don't think all white people say that. I said, not at any point in time. I said all white people. I said
Right.
systemic. Systemic means that those who are in power.
Yeah.
And then we went on some other things about wages and immigration. I said, who determined those things? The people who are in power. That's the system. It's not you. You don't feel that way. He said, I never looked at it that way.
Yeah.
He thought when he heard systemic, it was him.
Yeah.
So he got defensive.
Yeah.
I said, until we, me and you were talking, some people won't open their eyes and see.
And you're exactly right, because this idea of systemic racism, a lot of times you're right in your estimation that when white folks hear racism, they get defensive because they feel like you're pointing your finger at them. And what you're suggesting, and rightly so, is that the United States from its founding, and this isn't too hard to figure out. If you look back at the founding of our nation and the very fact that they had to compromise on the status, on the human context of Black people in our nation who were slaves as 3/5 of an individual.
Yes.
That should tell you that if that kind of language is in our founding documents, that the power structures, everything that was created and perpetuated in this country from the beginning was serving white people, the needs and the interest and the economic interest of white people. Because what people forget is that the entire economic system of this nation at its founding was dependent upon slave labor. And
Yeah.
at the point that you take that out, then the whole system would have collapsed. And yes, we have ended slavery as an institution in the United States because of the Civil War that was fought and won by the North. But the racism that was embedded in those institutions as it deals with education, as it deals with business and economics, and certainly as it deals with areas of justice, judicial, and policing, all of those racisms are still embedded that were there in the beginning, and we haven't addressed that. We've addressed
Yes.
the symptoms, the blatant symptoms of racism, but we haven't necessarily addressed the root causes.
You're right, Scott. And if you look back, going back, we can get rid of the spider web, but if we're gonna find that the spider that started this web, you go back to Baker's Rebellion.
Yeah.
And for those of you listening to this right now, you please do the Google search and put in Baker's Rebellion in Virginia back in the, I think it was it was 1675 or something, 16, yeah, where the enslaved blacks and enslaved or servitude whites got together and rebelled against the landowners, the white landowners, and that went on for a couple for a while. And the white landowners said, like, we can't have that.
Yeah.
We can't have them getting together. Because
Yep.
you had enslaved black who can earn their freedom, and you had enslaved whites who could earn their freedom, and they knew they had the similar situations. So what they want to do is put laws in place to start calling them, or we're white, they're black slaves.
Yeah.
That's where the term whites came from.
Yeah.
It was not in any law books until then.
Yeah. And it
So after
served the,
that, go ahead.
yeah, and I was just going to say it served the best interest of those white landowners, and so white powerful people said, there's always going to be more poor people or people
Yes,
that have less economic status than we are. So in order to preserve our power, we've got to differentiate between these groups and keep them divided and distracted. And so this idea of whiteness was created to keep people separated, because the white poor person then served a system that did not benefit them, but they were able to look at black people in the same context and psychologically say, well, at least I'm better than them. And
exactly,
what they didn't realize is that they were being manipulated to serve the needs of those at the top.
exactly. They were tricked in saying that, well, at least I'm the people, and I have opportunity, the American dream, to be like that,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not black.
Yeah.
And it was just a good con job to keep us at each other, so we never come together. And
Exactly.
that's been going on to now, and it thrives and everything. And like the founding of Bob Jones University.
Mm-hmm.
It was
Exactly.
founded as a white separatist university, so they can go to you have Christian college that was all white.
Absolutely. And you can trace that thread throughout the history of the United States, and it's something that continues today. And people who sometimes people push back and say, well, in the United States, anybody can be a success. They throw around terms like pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, and what they don't realize is that that very narrative serves to illustrate the fact that there are people that can't do that. So they point at the exceptions, but the exceptions prove the rule. If that was really the case, then everyone in the United States would be successful. My
That's
father,
right.
my father was one of the hardest working people that I ever knew. He worked at the same factory for 36 years. He actually outlasted it. They shut it down and they gave him a severance package, but he was never rich, and he worked harder than anybody else that I know, and certainly harder than a lot of people that I know today. So the point is not just hard work, but you've got to realize that some people start further back than others, and Black people in our nation have the added layer of systemic racism that is against them. So, what should be said is when you point to people who are successful, especially Black people, and you measure that in economic terms, what you need to say is look at how excellent they are to have overcome all of these barriers against them. And just imagine if there was an injustice in the nation. Just imagine how well people would be doing if there was true equity where everybody did have the same opportunity. But the point of the matter is that when you point to these exceptions, you're proving the rule that's not the case.
You're right. And what we do in the body of Christ is we, we should be different from everybody else, but we're not. We emulate what they do. And Sunday is still the most segregated day
Yeah,
of the week. People go to school together, people might work together. We don't necessarily live together because we know about redlining and all that. But when we go to church, we go to a white church and a black church. We go to a white Baptist church and a black Baptist. There's a white Methodist church or AME Zion church.
yeah. And what people need to understand about that is that sometimes, white folks, they point to that and say, well, look, Black people are choosing to self segregate. But that's not the case. If you go back after Reformation, there was a concerted effort by Black people to integrate into white churches. But it was the white folks that put the Black people out. And as long as racism continues in the white church, there's always going to be a Black church. So the Black church wasn't created because Black folks wanted to worship by themselves. The Black church was created in response to white churches that said, we don't want you here.
My friend brought up that same excuse. Well, why are there people trying to segregate themselves today? I said, they're not. Those organizations and those places, those groups you said they were segregationists, what he called them, they was made because they had nowhere else to go.
Exactly.
So you're right. That's so true. And even in the church, how some of the denomination came about because people who are in charge said, "Oh no, we can't do this." Me and you talked about the Azusa Street. The
Mm-hmm.
Azusa Street was an outpouring of God, where in California, where the Spirit of God hit, and people were getting saved. Workers, street workers, people working on railroads. California, where people from Asian, Black, white, Hispanic, all was there, and everybody was getting saved. And when it got to the point where they had to buy a building, what they called Azusa Street, the person in charge said, "No, we can't have this because too many people of color worshiping whites. We can't do this. It's not good." And
Yeah.
if you read a book, I forgot what the name of the book. I read there's a book written on Charles Purnham by another person, which shows he had a colorful past.
Yeah.
His views were
Absolutely.
very, 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 very racist. But
Absolutely.
it was not. It's not because of the Spirit of God he said we shouldn't do this. It's because this is not the way man did it. And that's
Yep.
not what the Bible says. We don't do things according to man.
Right. And that's a great illustration of the racism that continues. You're speaking specifically of 312 Azusa Street in 1906, Los Angeles, California. William J. Seymour,
Right.
who was a student of Charles Parham. In fact, at the Houston Bible College, he had to sit out in the hallway because of segregation to listen to the teaching of Parham. But when this revival broke out, you're exactly right. Seymour had to practically beg Parham to come. And when Parham came, he dismissed the revival with some of the most crude and racist remarks because it didn't fit the expectation of what was the United States at the time. Parham was absolutely a racist. In fact, he showed support for the Ku Klux Klan, embraced a lot of ideas about um, the um, the legacy and the beginnings of white people in America that were extra biblical, had nothing to do with the biblical text, but he twisted them to reflect a racist ideology. And Seymour was a humble leader, but he never received the recognition and that he was due for the leadership that he exhibited at Azusa Street. And people can say, well, that was a different time. Things are different now. But what we don't realize is that the root always
Yes.
dictates the fruit. And so
Yes.
if if
That's good. I
if you
like
got
that.
if you got bad roots, you're going to have bad
Yeah,
fruits.
bad fruit.
And
I
so
like that.
until we deal with the roots, we can't address the fruits. And so if you look at America today, uh, this still goes on in church circles. This still goes on in areas of education and justice. So if you're speaking to this generation, and how would you encourage them? What kinds of things would you say to people that are around our age and to younger people about what needs to be done?
I really believe the 2020 when the coronavirus hit, it caused a lot of people to stop. And a lot of people did a lot of introspective, and a lot of people got a chance to read
Yeah.
and actually look up things. And if people will really read things and see what the Bible say about how we should be acting, we'll see a whole different way. And like you said, I love that. The root will determine the fruit because all of the major denominations that came out of that outpouring, if you look at this white nationalist movement that's happened now,
Mhm.
most of these people came from that, came out of that. And
That's
their
right.
views are sort of the same.
Yeah.
So that we have to really look past we can see what's wrong, but there's one thing that's still true. There is a God. His son did still come to save us. And we need to find a way to serve him the biblical way, not this Western American, theology that we have right now. Because what's been taught right now is not necessarily how Christ walked the earth. I like to point people to the fact when Jesus went to one of the first thing he did after the wedding supper in Matthew's, he went to Samaria. And most Jews don't go through Samaria;
Mhm.
they go around it.
Yeah.
And when he went there, he said, "Wait a minute, let me send these guys out to get some food supplies," because he knew how they thought about people. He knew that the Samaritan woman was coming to the well, and he ministered to her where she was at and changed her life. And she went back and brought everybody else in the village. And then when the other disciples came back, they saw Jesus sitting there talking to all these Samaritans.
Yeah.
And I keep telling people when I teach them, like that's like a person comes and say, "Wait a minute, what is that guy talk to all those black people?" Or today, what is that text that talk to all those migrants coming across the border?
Yeah.
Jesus saw their needs and met them where they were at the needs,
Exactly.
and that's what we need to tell young people today. That's
Yeah.
what we're supposed to do.
And when we look to the example of Jesus, you're exactly right. He went against the grain of the culture. And I think you're exactly
Yes.
right when we especially in the context and this, we can't help but do this. Everybody does this. We look at things through our own experience, but when we're looking at the Bible, we need to realize that the Bible is greater than our own personal experience, and we need to get at what the Bible is saying instead of what we have been taught that the Bible says.
Oh, yes.
There's a
Oh,
difference in what
yes.
the Bible actually says and what we've been taught to believe about the Bible. And I'm convinced that most people have that backwards. When they say, I believe the Bible, what they're actually saying is, I believe what I've been taught about the Bible. And unfortunately, in our context, in this nation, so much of the Bible has been defined through the lens of the white dominant culture and church. Because during slave times, the church was complicit in perpetuating slavery, and in fact, would issue these interpretations of the Bible that would support the institution of slavery. And even slaves were taught to read the Bible this way to perpetuate their own enslavement. But of course, there were always people that had insight. I think of Nat Turner, who was a
Yes.
slave, who led a rebellion, and he was able to read the Bible and hear from God in a way that obviously countered that. And even though I'm not necessarily endorsing his methods or what happened, but I'm saying it makes sense that if you enslave people and push them down, that they're going to push back. And you read the Bible, God is a God of liberation. He didn't keep people enslaved. He set slaves free. And that's something that Nat Turner understood. And we don't ever talk about him or talk about all of those slaves that had inspiration from scripture and from God and pushed back against the system.
I would suggest that whoever listening to this, they take opportunity to read Tony Evans' book Oneness, or Dr. Eric Mason's book Black Apologetics.
Yeah.
Uh, the Bible was written in Africa,
Yep.
Northeast Africa, and the pictures that we've been shown through the Catholic Church and all that portrays an image of Jesus that was not true.
Right.
So if we live our life according to this Western view, like you said, that have been betrayed, that this is how we see ourselves. Most people see that, I see this picture of a white Jesus, so that means God is white and I'm white, so we're good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And everybody else is other.
Right.
No, Northeast Africa is not full of white people, especially back
Exactly.
then.
Exactly.
So if you look, in fact, if even when we went through the fact that Abraham, if we believe the Bible that Noah and his three sons populated the world, well, they all started in Africa.
Yeah.
So it's like, wow, we all came from one race. I love the way I think it was Ken Ham said, it's only one race, the human race. And you'll be shocked to find they all came from Africa.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly. And we perpetuate these false images um, so many times, and we don't realize what was behind their creation. And
oh yeah,
you're exactly right. These images of a white Jesus, these images of white apostles, it certainly wasn't historically accurate if you consider the place in the world that they were living and where they came from. Jesus most assuredly looked more like you than he did like me. But yet we hold on to these images, and people in the United States, they need to ask themselves, why are these images the ones that we look to? And I think it goes to the fact that if you look at the power struggle throughout the United States, to keep one set of people subjugated and enslaved and downtrodden, and then to uplift one particular group, then you can see why these images continue to be shared, because you cannot become what you cannot see. And if
Right.
people never saw this image of Jesus, of a Jesus that looks like them, they're going to assume that Jesus associates with the oppressor and the enslaver, but that's not the case. And Dr. King understood this, right? Dr. King, in his rhetoric, in his words, in his nonviolent resistance, he took the themes of Christianity as a Christian preacher, and he turned them around for white America to see, hey, you think you're on the side of Jesus, but actually you're on the side of the oppressor. You're not in the same boat as Jesus and his disciples, but you're in the boat of those that crucified and killed Jesus, because you're doing the same thing to people here in the United States.
I like to, you brought up Dr. King. If you read his letter from the prison, he
Yeah,
wrote that letter because other white evangelical preachers was telling him that he was doing it too fast. You know, he need to calm down, and these things gonna happen in time. So that was telling him, no, those things saying wait and calm down. So me almost like to us, it says it's never gonna happen. And he
exactly.
was confronting those preachers, and one of them was Billy Graham.
Hmm.
But one thing I have to hand it to Billy Graham. After he did that, Billy Graham did turn and changed, and he started opening up his revivals to blacks,
Yeah,
and to let it took him to see that, well, maybe Dr. King was right. We can't wait. If it's not the words of my enemy, it's the silence of my so-called friends.
exactly.
It's supposed to be with me, and some people do hear that. Some people do change.
And unfortunately, in our day and age, there's still a lot of silence from people that, for whatever reason, they don't want to get involved. And that's what I try to communicate to white people, because one of the hallmarks of being white in the United States is that you can walk away from these issues. You don't have to think about them if you don't want to. Whereas black people, people of color in our nation, um, you guys, you have to live with this, right? You always have to be vigilant. You have to be mindful of who's around you, because the history of our nation has said that there will be consequences, and sometimes violent consequences, if a black person, a black man especially, or even black women, say the wrong thing, or exhibit the wrong kind of behavior that is misinterpreted by the white people that are around them. That that very action can lead to their death, and that's not an exaggeration. All you have to look at is the way that black people are treated in routine traffic stops by the police, or in the history of our nation, if a black man looked at a white woman, um, and that's all he had to do with no intent. If there was just a glance, and that white woman chose to interpret that in a certain way, or others chose to interpret it, it was very likely that that black man, and in many cases it was the case, was lynched and was put to death. And so, generationally speaking, now black people still carry the weight of that history in their bodies and in their minds, that you can't take a break in your life. There's no place to rest. There's no place to relax. But for white folks, I can talk with you about this, and then when it's over, I have the privilege of going about my normal life, because I don't have to think about um, what might happen to me if I say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. I was just pulled over Saturday because the police officer looked at I was driving my wife's car, and she had the wrong color tint. And so he pulled me over. I thought he was pulling me over for speeding. He said, no, my tint was too dark. And it was, during that experience, even though I get nervous, everybody does when they get pulled over, um, it never entered in my mind that this police officer is going to hurt me. or I might
Yeah.
die. Unfortunately, when you're pulled over, or when, especially when younger Black men are pulled over, that is a very real statistically, um, uh, uh, eh, something statistically that happens more often than not when compared to white populations. And so, yeah, we can choose to be silent, but that silence continues to perpetuate all of these harms.
I remember coming home from, I used to do a Bible study at the college that I graduated from. So I did a lot of ministry on the campus. And coming home from that Bible study, driving to my house, I was probably a block from my house, and I saw blue lights behind me. So I said, "Oh, let's see what's going on." I knew I wasn't speeding because I was that close to my house. So I pulled those aside, and the police got stopped behind me. And I could tell, what they're doing. They're checking your tag and everything. And then they get out and actually come out. And when he got to my car, saw my license and everything, I said, "Can I ask why you stopped me?" He said, "We're just checking for people around this area." I said, "Well, my license was not out of date. My tag wasn't out of date. I had no tint on my windows. I mean, I was just he stopped me because of what neighborhood I was in and who I was.
Yeah, yeah,
I think I was the only Black person on my street at the time. So I didn't look like I belonged in the neighborhood. So
yeah,
he pulled me over.
yeah,
And I say, if you look at that address, my house is right down the street.
yeah,
That's how I get out of the ticket.
yeah,
Well, got me to get back in the car and say I'm okay. I mean, I'm where I'm supposed to be.
yeah,
And the last thing I tell you is, as a college person, that I played football and was on scholarship, but I had to work while I was in school. So I was a security guard because most mall like big guys to be,
yeah,
security guards. So if you were the security guard for the mall, you had to protect all the anchor stores around the two, the mall area with all the small stores and the big anchor stores like Belts. Uh, um, at that time it was McGrady's, but they are out now, Sears and all this stuff. And I came to pick up my check one day, not wearing my uniform. I walked through Belts and I saw that there was some pants on sale. So instead of going straight to the security office and pick up my check, I stopped and looked at the pants. And I noticed this the security person was watching me. Now I knew them all because I had to, because I'm the mall. I was part of the mall security,
yeah.
but he didn't recognize me because I didn't have my uniform on.
Wow.
So I said I'm gonna go to the shoe section and see what he followed me. So I walked over to the section, and he followed me over there. So I picked up a pair of shoes, looked at him, turned around, and said, "Hey Jack, how you doing?" And then when he saw me, he
Yeah,
turned beet red.
yeah,
And then walked away. So the next day when I came into work, I went, got checked in, got on duty with my uniform. I walked to that store. I went to the security office. Said, "Jack, y'all let a lot of people go through here, and they shop there because y'all looking at the wrong people. You
exactly.
spent 15 minutes following me, and I work here."
Yeah,
And he was so, I didn't know. I said, "No. Well, how many other people you do that to?"
absolutely. And unfortunately, your story is all too common, um, an experience of Black people in this nation. Darryl, we've got a few minutes left, and I'm going to give you the last word on this. What is something that's on your heart that you want to share with people around these issues? I know this issue is going to heat up a lot. We're in an election
Oh yeah.
year, and the politicians, they like to talk about these particular issues, not necessarily because they like to solve problems, but because they like to create those divisions. So, what's on your heart? What do you want to talk about and tell folks about these particular issues?
For those who are listening to this, who honestly want to be the light of Christ, who are not concerned about these issues of right and left, red and blue,
Mm-hmm.
who looking to actually help change people, be the love of Christ. Allow yourself to reach out to people who don't look like you.
Mm-hmm.
With walls, we call to build bridges.
Absolutely.
And we need to be able to reach out to those who don't look good, maybe not smell good,
Mm-hmm.
might not have the best of everything, and show them love. That's how Gary Beach won me. I mean, he looked at a person who didn't look like him, but he reached out to me. He invited me over to his house to dinner. He took me in, invited me to his feet, and introduced me to his family, and showed me what God's love was. He walked it. He didn't just talk it. And see, today we talk it, we never walk it.
That's good.
And that's what we need to do, because we have a young generation who is just sick of church. Because they see people who call themselves Christians, and they see people who call themselves white supremacists and racists, and they're lining up together. So we need to see people who are, well, I love God, and I serve this God who is love, and I love whoever because you are God's child. When we start showing that, then people say, well, that's different. In fact, that's what John said. They would know we were believers because the way we love one another.
That's beautiful, Darryl, and I think that's a great way to conclude our conversation today. But I want to do more of this in the future because I think what you have to say resonates with so many people, and we need to have more conversations like this around these issues and not less. And so that's what I would encourage. I know that you do this personally, and I know others do it as well. But I would encourage everyone, if you have the opportunity to have difficult conversations, and coming from the white perspective, if you can just shut up and listen and don't seek to correct or don't seek to input your own ideas, but just listen to what other people have to say and accept their experiences and seek to learn. I think that we can work on making a better nation for everyone. But it starts with talking to one another and
Yes,
letting that light shine, like you said.
yes. And start from one person reaching out to the other person, say, hey, my name is, and
Yep,
shaking their hand and talking.
that's exactly right. Well, Darryl, thank you so much, and we'll do this again soon, my friend. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, brother.